his superstars are involved. And here's what happened. In about 1970, I guess it was 75 or 70, it wasn't 76, it was before that. A friend of mine who was a caseworker at the Department of Welfare, where I was also a caseworker. I had since quit just to stay home and be creative, as a friend put it. Yeah, I got married and I had a little opportunity to be creative, so that's what I did. He had a friend who wanted to do a book about Andy Warhol's superstars. Now, both of my friends had both been in a religious community. My friend, the welfare, he had been a seminarian, a Jesuit, and then he left the seminary. And the friend he recommended, John Fackler, had been a Jesuit monk for 5 years, enduring a vow of silence. So when he got out of the monastery, I think he wanted to kick up his heels and be a little bit wild. And he had a girlfriend named Ingrid who worked at Max's Kansas City. Now, Max's Kansas City was a very popular and trendy restaurant in New York in the 70s. It attracted a lot of people. It had a back room where people could hang out. The only meals back there were dried chickpeas. So the people who hung out there that John met there were Andy Warhol's superstars. Also hanging out in the back room were Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe, who at that point were a couple. I agreed to do the photographs for John's book, and that involved going after midnight, because the stars didn't show up until after midnight, and hanging out there and introducing myself and asking them if I could take their picture and setting up appointments. Most of them agreed. There was only a couple that didn't agree. Also hanging out back there was Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe, and they were nice. They were sweet, they were friendly, and they were pretty down to earth. So I was chatting with them, and I asked them if I could take their photograph in the nude. Now, that wasn't part of the Warhol project. That was like my project, because I was big on nudes. I took a lot of nudes in those days. Now, let's don't confuse nudes with pornography. Many artists love the body. Now, I was particularly interested in the body, the human body, because I had never seen a naked person until I grew up and left home. Maybe my baby brother, because he was a lot younger than me, I changed his diaper, but other than that, I never saw my mother nude, my father nude, my grandmother nude, my sister nude, my aunts nude, and certainly nobody in the community. So to me, it was like revelation. And bodies are beautiful. So they agreed. They agreed that they would pose nude for me. And we made an appointment, and I went up to their room at the Hotel Chelsea. Hotel Chelsea was a very popular place. People lived there as permanent residents, and there was also people having, temporary residence. So when they opened the door, I was kind of shocked. They weren't totally nude. They were wearing religious things. Robert had a skull necklace, which was quite attractive. And Patty had on some rosaries. Well, they both had on rosaries and crucifixes. I wasn't prepared for that, but I didn't say anything. I says, let's go. Let's take the pictures. Now, during the time that we were taking the pictures, I noticed that Patty had a scar on her abdomen. And she told me that the scar came from having a baby. She had had a baby when she was 20 years old. And at that point, I felt a bond with her, or a connection, because I too had had a baby. I had the baby when I was 22 years old. And Patti had put up her baby for adoption. Her baby was a little girl. My baby was a little girl. Well, I had decided, despite all the advice to the contrary, to keep my baby. For me, she was not the only person I'd met in New York at that time who'd had a baby. My friend Max has had a baby who she put up for adoption. And the first couple, the father, well, I was going to say, I don't know who the father of the baby was, but she lived with her boyfriend, who is a Central American Chilean filmmaker. So when the baby was born, the friends of the Chilean filmmaker went to the hospital, and they were looking at the baby, and the people who were going to adopt the baby pulled out. Max, of course, was white, and they were South Americans. I would say they're called Hispanic, but let's not get into that. Anyway, I couldn't put up my baby for adoption. And I felt a tenderness toward Patti, because that's a hard thing to do. It really is. I knew if I did it, I'd be obsessing on it and constantly ruminating on it for the rest of my life. Besides, I thought I could handle it. So how'd Mike Luckman get involved? So it's a story that I'm going to tell you, and I might tell you in a separate video, because it's getting kind of long. And it's also a sleazy story. Now, lots of New Yorkers are not sleazy, but there are plenty of them who are. And New York can be a very sleazy place. It's a fun place, a glamorous place, an exciting place, a wonderful place to live, but it also has its sleazy elements. And you can be walking down the street, a very nice street, and you can be stepping on crack vials. There have been times when I've been walking down the street in New York when I stepped on at least 20, 30 crack vials. Sometimes they were in front of crack houses where people went to take drugs. And so a lot of these underground newspapers were involved in drugs. Drugs and pornography. And some weren't. Like Majority Report was only involved in women's issues. And any time they would take a stand, it would be against pornographers, against drugs. But that wasn't for everybody. Now, the New York Daily Planet was a new newspaper. I had never seen a copy of it because there wasn't a copy of it. Mike Luckman was the publisher and editor of the New York Daily Planet. Now, Mike Luckman died 2022. Aaron Kay just told me that a couple of weeks ago. Now, Mike Luckman was an entrepreneur. And Mike Luckman did many, many different things. Mike Luckman was one of the co-owners of Forbidden Planet, and that's a science fiction store. They sold comic books, science fiction books, I guess films too. Now, Mike also had a underground Tonight Show. Well, he was sort of like Johnny Carson, and here he is, looking at a piece of paper, smoking a joint on the air. Now, this was 1976, and at that time, there weren't that many public access cable news, well, hardly news, but cable night shows on television, as he was an innovator. So he put an ad in the Village Voice for material for his new newspaper. And my friend Artie also answered that ad, unbeknownst to me, but Artie was up there photographing the people in the Underground Tonight Show. So I went to call the number, and I went to visit Mike. So at that time, I'd already taken some of the photographs for the Warhol Project. I'd taken Candy Darling, and I'd taken Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe. Not everybody, because it took a long time to photograph everybody on John's list. So I showed my pictures to Mike, and of course, he really liked them. Why wouldn't he? So I made the mistake, and I'm saying it's a mistake, of handing him the photographs and giving him permission to use them. Now, I did not sell them. No money changed hands. I think that was the deal. You were a volunteer, and I was actually a volunteer over there at Majority Report. That was all done on a volunteer basis. I'm sure that the leaders got paid. I'm sure Nancy got paid, but we never discussed getting paid. And now the other mistake I made, I never discussed publishing the photographs that I took when I was taking them of Patti and Robert. And there's a big difference from people giving you permission to take their picture and people giving permission to publish them. Now, usually what the photographer does is she carries these, or he carries these models release papers. Now, after this, I always got a models release from the people I was photographing for the Warhol Project. But at that time, I just neglected to do it. I never discussed publishing the photographs with them. They knew I was working on a book that was hopefully John's book to be published. So I left the pictures with him. I wrote a story about Candy Darling for him called The Beauty Worshippers. And I wrote that story under the name of Lois Lane, because the paper's called the New York Daily Planet, which was Superman's newspaper, and the Superman comics, and the Superman TV show. And I thought it was funny. Now, recently, I was reading on Gemini about the Patti pictures and the trouble that the Patti pictures caused for Patti and for Mike and for me. And they said no one knew who took the pictures. Well, that's ridiculous. Patti knew who took the pictures. Robert knew who took the pictures, and Mike knew who took the pictures. Now, Mike might have been the only one who wouldn't want to tell who took the pictures. But nobody knew my name. Nobody ever discussed it with me. I never received a phone call from Patti Smith or Robert Mapplethorpe, because in the article that Mike wrote on the Daily Planet, he said that the lawyers of Patti Smith tried to block the publication of the nude photographs taken of her 3 years ago at the Chelsea Hotel. Attorney David I. Burston, who represents Smith, and her manager Jane Friedman said these are very private pictures taken a long time ago for private use. Burston, a member of the law firm of Delson and Gordon, asserted, "You have no right to take these into your own hands. They are not public property. There is nothing that puts them in the area of the public." Well, in a way she was right, because I didn't get the models release. So I was guilty. Now subsequently, down the road, I got a lawyer. And I had my lawyer contact her lawyer, and I signed a release that I would never publish the nude photographs again. And so you may find that there's not that many photographs here of Patti Smith. I have a few of her dressed, and such as this one where that's a close-up. Wait a minute. Let's see what I can do. Alrighty. Okay. How about that? Nope. Nope. Okay, here we go. I have this one of Patti. I don't think that's too embarrassing. She looks beautiful. She was beautiful. And when I was photographing her, she was talking about her work. She had started a book of poetry about Brian Epstein. He was the manager for the Beatles. And, there's a lot of interest in him. I think it was a book of poetry. And that was before either one of them became really famous. I think when Luckman put out this New York Daily Planet, one of her albums had come out and she was getting very popular. Now, Robert was a very friendly and sweet person. And after I took the photographs of him, he took me to his studio and I got to see what he was working on. Now, he was not working on photographs, and ironically enough, he became famous in the beginning for his nude photographs. But at that time, he was working on big sculptures. I don't even know if you call them sculptures. Big things. And a lot of those big things were made with religious articles. I didn't interview him. I don't know what his religious background was. And I made a mistake, well, another mistake. I seem like I made a lot of mistakes. And I made the mistake of not interviewing him about his work and not taking pictures of his installations. I don't know if he would have allowed me to do it, but they were just a dramatic departure from the photographs. He took very large photographs. They were gorgeous. I saw them at the Museum of Modern Art for the first time, and he also had quite spectacular frames on them. I imagine that he designed the frames. But that was it. I never spoke to Patti or Robert again in my life. And they never called me, and their lawyers never called me. Now, they knew who I was. They had to. I didn't make any attempt to hide my identity. I wasn't there incognito. But this bothered me. It bothered me that I got into trouble. Well, actually, I didn't get into trouble. Mike Luckman got into trouble. But he didn't get into trouble. I just felt really bad about it because I only took these pictures. I never take any pictures to to wound anybody or exploit anybody. And I certainly didn't take them to exploit Patti and Robert. So I grieved over this for years. And so I'm going to give a word of advice now to young artists or any photographer. Protect your work. When you go to take a picture, make sure you do everything legally correct. Because you have the copyright of pictures that you take. I mean, I have the copyright of these pictures because I took them. But subsequently, once these were published, they were stolen. These pictures appeared after this newspaper came out. They appeared on lots of underground newspapers, and I heard they also appeared on t-shirts in Burlington, Vermont. So put yourself in the clear, do the right thing. And I felt bad because I didn't know if I damaged Patti. I've always felt guilty and shamed about that. But ever onward. I thought that Luckman took the pictures and wrongfully used them. Now, according to the things I read on artificial intelligence, geez, you can see this really upset me. I'm drawing a blank here. Anyway, that's it. I'll be back with more pictures. And I'll try to learn some video editing skills so I can do this the right way. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. And until the next time when I will get these pictures together. Thank you. Bye-bye.